So hello everyone and welcome back to STUDIFYSUCCESS. We are back with the second part of how do organisms reproduce, which is another chapter from class 10th biology. In the first part we have covered asexual reproduction and various types of asexual reproduction. Now in the second part we are going to cover sexual reproduction in organisms. All the notes of this chapter are available in the description section, and for more study content you can always visit our website STUDIFYSUCCESS.com. So let's get started with sexual reproduction and with the second part of this chapter. So let's understand what is sexual reproduction. As I have explained you earlier as well, asexual reproduction is when only one parent is required for reproduction. When two parents come together for reproduction, that reproduction is called sexual reproduction. So it is the process of producing new organisms from two parents by making use of their sex cells or the gametes. So both of the parents use some specialized cells which are only made for reproduction, and these cells are called gametes. The fusion of these gametes gives us the zygote, which is the new individual which is going to continue the generation. So sexual reproduction is seen in humans, fish, dogs, cats and many other mammals, and in flowering plants as well. So there are two main processes which have to occur during sexual reproduction. First is the formation of gametes and second is the fusion of gametes. First of all, formation of gametes have to take place separately in both the parents. So in males it occurs in a different way and in females it occurs in a different way. Then from two parents the gametes have to come together at one place and have to fuse together or combine together to form a new individual. So these two are the main processes which occur in sexual reproduction. Now in sexual reproduction, DNA from both the individuals, from both the parents, come together to form a new individual. DNA from both of them combine and mix together to form a new individual. But what is the problem over here? So here you can see I have drawn something. So let's consider that humans have 46 chromosomes in each cells. So 46 chromosomes from the mother comes and 46 chromosomes from the father comes and fuse together to give us 92 chromosomes. Now a cell with 92 chromosomes will not be a human cell, because a human cell should have 46 chromosomes. But now it has double of 46, which is 92 chromosomes. This cell will not be a human cell, this will be something else. So this is the problem when we have DNA from two different parents. To solve this problem, we have the formation of gametes or germ cells, in which these 46 chromosomes are reduced to half and then they form gametes or specialized cells which fuse ahead. So here you can see this is the mother's organism. It has 46 chromosomes in one cell. These chromosomes reduce to 23 cells only, and same way in the father as well, the 46 chromosomes reduce to 23 chromosomes. Both of these 23 chromosomes combine, they give us 46 chromosomes again, which is a human cell. So this is the correct way for reproduction to occur in sexual organisms, because there is fusion from two different parents. So DNA from two individuals is combined to form a progeny and promote variations. Now what is the problem here? We have discussed that new generation, if the DNA is combined as it is, new generation will have twice the amount of DNA if normally cells are mated. So as a solution, germ cells are formed, which are also called gametes. These germ cells have half the number of chromosomes and they combine to form a new offspring in sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction promotes variation and thus promotes diversity of characters in offsprings. This we have discussed earlier as well. Moving ahead with sexual reproduction in plants. So we'll start with plants. What happens in plants? So as I told you, sexual reproduction involves two different parents. One is the father and one is the mother. So a plant has reproductive structures, which is the flower. Flower has the further reproductive structures which forms the gametes and where fertilization occurs. starting with the different parts of flowers, we will see what are the different parts of flowers and what are the reproductive structures which are present in a flower. So this is the structure of a flower. In a flower, starting from the lowest part, we have sepals. You can see these small green leafy things, these are called sepals. The sepals protect the flower when it is in its bud stage. So when the flower is a bud and it is in its budding stage, at that stage the flower is protected by these sepals. Then after sepals we have the petals, which are colored leafy structures which are present on a flower. The function of these petals are to attract insects and pollinators for pollination. Okay, so this is the function of petals. Petals and sepals both are not the reproductive parts, these are the accessory parts of a flower. The reproductive parts of a flower are the stamen and the pistil, which is also called the carpel. Starting from the pistil, pistil is the female reproductive part of a flower. Pistil is also called the carpel and it is the female reproductive part of a flower. So at the center you can see this structure. This structure is the pistil. So in this structure there are three different parts. The first part is the upper receptive part, which is sticky in nature. This part is called the stigma. Then there is a long tube-like structure which joins the stigma to the lower swollen part, and this tube-like part is called the style. At the very end, at the bottom, we have a swollen part, swollen oval shaped part, which is called the ovary. And in this ovary there are many ovules. You can see small structures inside the ovary. These are ovules. These ovules have the gametes which will fuse to form a zygote. So inside the ovules there are the egg cells or the gametes which will fuse to form the zygote. So these are the three parts of the female reproductive parts of a flower, which is the pistil or the carpel. Then we have the male reproductive part, which is the stamen. So stamen is the male reproductive part. You can see here these structures, these are called the stamen. Stamen also further has two parts. You can see on the top it has a bilobed part. You can see this part has two lobes. In this diagram you can see it nicely. It has two lobes like this, kidney bean type. It has two lobes. That lobed part is called the anther and the long tube like part is called the filament. So inside the anther we have pollen grains. Like inside the ovary we had ovules, inside the anther we have pollen grains, and inside the pollen grain we have the germ cell or the gamete which will fuse with the egg to form the zygote. So let's just read it out. Sepals protect the flower in the budding stage, I have told you. Petals attract the insects for pollination. Stamen is the male reproductive part and it produces the pollen grains. Pollen grains are yellowish in color. Then the stamen has two parts, the anther and the filament. Anther is the bilobed structure at the top which stores the pollen grains, and then the pollen grains further has the male germ cell. Filament is the long slender tube-like part of the stamen. Then pistil or carpel is the female reproductive part and it produces ovules. These ovules, I told you, they are present inside the ovary. So pistil or carpel again has three parts, the stigma, style and ovary. The stigma is the terminal part and it is located at the top. It is sticky. Then we have the style, which is the middle elongated part, and then we have the ovary, which is the swollen bottom part, and it has ovules which store the egg cell or the gamete. The ovules have the gamete. The ovule is not the gamete, but the ovule, inside the ovule there are gametes or the egg cell which is present. So these are the different parts of a flower. Now we will see how these parts combine together to form a zygote. Now what is pollination? Let's see what is pollination. You may have heard about pollination before as well. Pollination is simply the transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma of a flower. Now both the gametes are produced in different parts. The pollen grain has the male gamete, so the male gamete is produced in the stamen. The female gamete is produced inside the ovule in the carpel. So both the gametes have to come together to combine and form a new individual. For that we have to transfer one of the gametes to the other gamete. So the male gamete, which is the pollen grain, is transferred from the anther where it is produced to the stigma of the flower. This is why the stigma of the flower, I told you, is sticky in nature, because the pollen grains simply just stick onto the stigma, and from the stigma they go to the ovary. This transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma is called pollination. Now how is this transfer possible? This transfer is done by various agents which are called pollinators. So by wind, water, or by various animals. So wind or water can erode these pollen grains from anther to stigma. Also many times when honeybees come to suck the nectar of a flower, they take these pollen grains with them. The pollen grains stuck on their hair, on their body, and the pollen grains are transported from one flower to the other flower. You can see here a bee is transporting pollen grain from anther to stigma. So bee here is acting as a pollinator. Sometimes humans may also act as pollinators when we move or when we touch various plants. Now these are some keywords which are unisexual flowers and bisexual flowers. Before we discuss the types of pollination, we should know what a unisexual and bisexual flower is. So a unisexual flower, uni means one. So unisexual flower means it has one sex, that is one gender. So it either has male reproductive parts or either it has female reproductive parts. So such flowers which either have the male reproductive part or the female reproductive part are called unisexual flowers. When a flower has both the reproductive parts, the male and the female as well, such flowers are called bisexual flowers. Moving ahead now with the types of pollination. So we have self-pollination and we have cross-pollination. What is self-pollination? Self, you can understand by the name. Pollination which occurs within a plant. So pollination which occurs in the same flower. Whenever a flower is bisexual, here you can see the flower is bisexual. It is having the anther as well and it is having the stigma as well. So when pollination occurs in the same flower, so from this anther the pollen grains are simply going to the stigma of the same flower. Such pollination is called self-pollination. So whenever the transfer of pollen occurs in the same flower or in two flowers of the same plant. So if there are two or more flowers in the same plant, whenever pollination is there between them, that pollination is also called self-pollination. Cross-pollination. Cross-pollination means whenever the transfer is between two different plants itself. So this is one plant, this is in one pot and this is in another pot. So when the transfer is from one plant to another plant, and of course of the same species, because different species don't fuse together. So considering that both of them are rose plants, for example, and from one rose plant to another rose plant, pollens are moving from anther to stigma with the help of some pollinators. Such pollination is called cross pollination, when transfer is between two different plants and two different flowers. When transfer is between the same flower or two flowers of the same plant, then it is called self-pollination. When two different plants are there, then it is called cross-pollination. So I hope you understood this. Moving ahead with fertilization. Now the transfer of pollen grains have occurred. Now the pollen grains have reached the stigma. So with the help of pollination, the pollen grains have come here to the stigma. Now what is the process ahead? How will the gametes fuse? So when the pollen grains come to the stigma, due to the sticky surface of the stigma, the pollen grains stick onto the stigma. After sticking onto the stigma, pollen grains start to develop a tube-like structure. This tube-like structure is called the pollen tube. So the pollen tube starts growing from the pollen grain. It starts moving towards the ovary. From the style it goes towards the ovary and then it enters the ovary. Here you can see it is entering the ovary. After entering the ovary, it is entering the, this is one ovule. So this complete part is the ovary. This small orange part is one ovule. So it enters one ovule as well, and inside the ovule we know that there is the female germ cell is there, which is the egg. Egg is inside the ovule. So the pollen tube enters the ovule, and then inside the ovule it releases the male germ cell. So inside this pollen tube you can see the male germ cell is also coming. Here is the male germ cell. So with the help of this tube, the male germ cell comes from the pollen grain all to the ovary into the ovule, and then it combines with the egg cell in the ovule of the ovary. Now let's just read it out quickly. Pollen is transferred from anther to stigma by pollinators, and we know that this is called pollination. When pollen is transferred, pollen gets attached to the sticky surface. This is the complete process which is happening. Now when it is sticked to the stigma, now to reach the ovule, a tube grows out of the pollen grain and it travels to the ovary. Then this pollen tube enters the ovary, where the ovule and pollen grain fuses to form the zygote. This process is called fertilization or fusion. So what is fertilization? Fertilization is the combination or fusion of the male and female gamete in the plant body or in the ovary. What happens after fertilization? After fertilization, so we have the male germ cell, we have the female germ cell. Both of them combine to give us a new cell which is called the zygote, This zygote gives rise to the new individual. After zygote formation, the zygote undergoes several cell divisions. So zygote divides several times, undergoes multiple cell divisions to form embryo. Embryo has the future plant. So what happens is, when embryo is formed, rest all other parts degrade. The excessive pollen grains, the stigma, style, they just simply fall off. The petals, sepals, now the petals and sepals are of no use, so their work is done. Now they simply shed off or fall off. The ovary ripens, the ovary grows in size, it ripens and it forms the fruit. The ovule grows into seed, and inside the seed we have the embryo or the future plant. You can see this is what is happening inside the seed. So this is the seed. Around the seed we have, this is the embryo which we have. The top part of the embryo is called the plumule, which is the future shoot, which will grow into shoot in future, and the lower part is called the radicle, which will grow into the root. At the side of the embryo we have leaf-like structures which are called cotyledons, which are the food storage structures. They provide the embryo with food and nourishment. So when the embryo has proper nutrients, proper favorable conditions, the embryo germinates to form a new sapling. So this is what happens during fertilization and after fertilization in plants, and how sexual reproduction is done in plants. Moving ahead with sexual reproduction in human beings. So now we'll start with reproduction in human beings. We know human beings also undergo sexual reproduction, that is, two parents are required for reproduction in human beings as well. But in human beings, formation of gametes only starts after a certain age, that is, when the two parents attain sexual maturity, then only the formation of gametes start. So this age is called puberty. We have studied about this earlier as well. Puberty and adolescence. This is the age when the sex hormones or the gametes begin to be produced in boys and girls, and they become sexually mature. So earlier they were children, now they are in process of becoming adults and to become sexually mature. How do they become sexually mature? The sexual reproductive organs start developing, and the reproductive organs start producing the gametes and the sex hormones. What is the function of these sex hormones? So firstly, testosterone and estrogen are the two sex hormones produced in human beings. These sex hormones initiate these changes in human beings. So let's start with the changes which are common in both boys and girls, and then we'll see some particular changes in boys and girls. So thick hair growth in armpits and in genital area. is a common change, and it is a very natural change which is seen in human beings when they reach puberty. Puberty is generally between 10 to 15 years of age. Whenever a human being, whenever a child hits puberty, they see thick hair growth in armpits and in genital area, which is also called the pubic region. Then we have thin hair on legs, arms and face. So on face as well we see a lot of hair growth. The skin gets very oily, and due to this oily skin there is appearance of pimples. The skin gets oily because the glands which are present in the skin, the sweat glands, the activity of these sweat glands increases during puberty. Due to this increased activity, the skin starts getting oily, and we see a lot of pimples on the faces of these young children. So females hit puberty earlier than males. We have seen the common changes which are common in both boys and girls. Now coming particularly to females. Females almost at an average hit puberty at around 10 to 12 years of age, which is relatively earlier than what happens in males. Males hit puberty around 13 to 14 years of age. In females, there are some major changes which we see is the increase in the breast size, because we know the breast has the mammary glands which are very important to feed a newborn child. So in order to become sexually mature, the female should be able to feed and nourish the child. That is why the breast size increases, because the mammary glands are developing. Then another very important change is the beginning of the menstrual cycle. So in females, monthly the egg becomes mature, and whenever the egg is not fertilized, egg which is the gamete is not fertilized, egg is released by our body along with all the preparations the body has done for receiving the child. All that is shed off, and blood comes out of the vagina or the body of the female. These are the two very important changes which are seen in females. Coming to males, I have told you that males start puberty at 13 to 14 years of age, which is a bit later than what happens in females. The two major changes which are visibly seen are the thick facial hair. We see beard and mustache which starts growing on the faces of various men, and the voice begins to crack. Why does the voice begin to crack? Because of the development of the voice box. We see the Adam's apple in a lot of males, and that is why the voice begins to crack. Sometimes the voice becomes very harsh and coarse, but slowly and steadily it becomes normal, and it is a very natural process. So these are all the changes we see in human beings, in both boys and girls, after which they attain sexual maturity, controlled by sexual hormones which are testosterone and estrogen, which control and regulate all these changes in human beings. Now moving ahead, we will study the different types, the different systems which are present in human beings. So we have studied about male and female reproductive systems in plants as well. Now we will study about male and female reproductive systems in humans as well. So we see different reproductive systems in humans because of two different parents which are involved in sexual reproduction. Starting with the male reproductive system. What are the different parts of the male reproductive system and what are their different functions? This needs to be remembered, and this needs to be understood very nicely because this can come in exam. So the male reproductive system includes two portions. First are the parts that produce the gametes or the sperms, the germ cells which carry half the number of chromosomes. Then are the parts that deliver these germ cells, which are the sperms, to the site of fertilization. So the site of fertilization is the female body. So the parts which deliver these formed sperms to the female body. So there are two types of body parts, starting with the parts which produce the germ cells. So we have the testes, which is a very important part. You can see here, these are the testes. So testes are a pair of round structures which are present in the scrotum. Now what is a scrotum? Scrotum is a sac-like structure which hangs outside the abdomen. Why is it outside the abdomen and not inside the abdomen? There is a particular reason. Now the sperms or the gametes are formed inside these testes over here. So the sperms are formed inside these testes, and for the formation of sperms, the testes require temperature lower than the normal body temperature. About 2 to 3 degrees less than the body temperature is required by the testes for the formation of the sperms. That is why the testes are located outside the body in a sac-like structure which is called the scrotum to maintain this body temperature. That is why they are located outside. Now, this condition is favorable for the development of the sperms. The testes, along with the production of sperms, they also form the testosterone hormone, which I told you is the sex hormone in males. That is also produced by the testes only. So the scrotum carries the testes, and this is because the sperm production requires 2 to 3 degrees less temperature than the body. Hence, testes are located in the scrotum outside the body. Then we have a tube-like structure which is called vas deferens. You can see here from the testes a tube-like structure is coming out, and it is going all the way up to the urethra. So you can see now the sperms are formed. Okay, so the testes forms the sperms. Now the sperms are ready, and they are ready to fertilize the egg. Now the sperms are carried from the testes all the way to the urethra by this vas deferens. So vas deferens is a tube-like structure which carries all the sperms from the testes to outside the body. So you can see it is coming inside the abdomen now, and now it is overlapping or crossing the ureter because it is joining the ureter. Ureter is a tube-like structure which is coming from the urinary bladder. So ureter is a tube which is coming from the urinary bladder. It joins the vas deferens, and together the ureter and vas deferens together combine to form this tube which is called the urethra. This is the final common tube for urine and for the passage of sperms as well. So this is a common tube in males which is seen. So vas deferens is a tube-like structure which carries the mature sperms from testes through the urethra for ejecting out. Ejecting out means for releasing out. It combines with the ureter to form the urethra. This I told you. Urethra, now what is the urethra? It is a common duct which is responsible for the passage of both urine and for the spermatic fluid. Spermatic fluid is the fluid which has the sperms and other secretions. So the urethra is formed by the combination of the ureter which is coming from the bladder and vas deferens which has the sperms which are coming from the testes. So now we have some more parts, and then we will see how is the sperm formed and how is the sperm transported. So we have the seminal vesicle. We have studied about the tubes and the testes where the sperms form. Now we have two very important glands which are associated with this male reproductive system. These glands secrete their secretions into this urethra. You can see this is the urethra, and here are the seminal vesicles which are present, and this is the prostate gland which is present. So we have the seminal vesicles and the prostate gland. With these two glands secrete various secretions into the urethra for the formation of semen. Now semen includes the sperm and the secretions of these glands. So what does the seminal vesicle release? Seminal vesicle is a pair of thin walled sac. It is a sac which releases or secretes fluid for the nourishment of the sperms. Now these sperms should have some energy for their movement. So these energy for their nourishment, all the vitamins and all the necessary nutrients are supplied by the seminal vesicle. What is the function of the prostate gland? The prostate gland secretes fluid to maintain the pH of the semen, because the vagina or the female reproductive system is acidic in nature. To protect the sperms in that acidic environment, it secretes a fluid to maintain the pH of the sperm and pH of the semen so that it can survive in that acidic environment. The last part which we have is the penis. Penis is the external male genital organs which is seen outside the body. Now penis has the urethra, and from that urethra the semen is ejaculated out of the body. So this urethra deposits the sperm into vagina with the help of this penis. So above the penis you can see there is a foldable or there is a movable skin which is called the foreskin. This foreskin moves and then the urethra releases the semen outside the body of the male and into the body of the female. Then what is semen and what is sperm? Starting with the sperm, sperm is the male reproductive cell or the gamete which is formed by the testes we have seen, and it is then transported. So the sperm is formed here in the testes, then it is transported from the vas deferens and then it enters the urethra. Then into the urethra, seminal vesicle and the prostate glands release the secretions, and then the semen is formed. Semen is the secretions from seminal vesicles and from the prostate along with sperm. So all the secretions along with sperm combinedly are called the semen. Sperm is the male reproductive cell. This is the structure of the sperm. So sperm has a head like structure which is called the acrosome. Then it has a middle piece and then it has a long tail. This tail is responsible for the movement or for the motility of the sperm. So this is the basic structure of the sperm. Let's see how is the sperm transported in the male reproductive system. So the sperms are first formed in the testes over here, then they are transported by the vas deferens where to the urethra, and then due to the secretions of the seminal vesicles and the prostate, they form the semen. Now the final semen is released out or ejaculated out by the penis. So this is how the sperms are formed and they are transported in the male reproductive system. So I hope the complete male reproductive system is clear to you. Let's move ahead to the female reproductive system. Let's understand the female reproductive system now. So again, like the male reproductive system, the female reproductive system also has different parts, starting with the ovaries. Ovaries are the female primary reproductive organ. Like the testes was the male primary reproductive organ, the testes had dual function. The testes was producing the testosterone as well, and the testes was responsible for the formation of the sperm as well. Similarly, the ovaries are responsible for the production of the female sex hormone, which is the estrogen and progesterone, as well as for the formation of the gamete, which is ovum or the egg. Ovum or the egg is also formed by the ovaries, and the female sex hormone is also released by the ovaries. So you can see we have two ovaries on either side of the uterus. Just below the kidneys we have the ovaries. In these ovaries we have various eggs which are released every month by one of the ovary. 1 month by this ovary and another month by this ovary. The eggs are released. Now from here the eggs come into this tube like structure which is called the oviduct or the fallopian tube. This oviduct or the fallopian tube carries the eggs from the ovary to this structure. Now what is this structure? This inverted pear shaped structure or pear shaped organ is called the uterus. From the ovary, with the help of the oviduct, the egg reaches this uterus. And so for the uterus, you can see the upper part of the uterus is broader than the lower part of the uterus. The lower part of the uterus ends with a cervix. Cervix is joined by the vagina. Vagina is the final outer opening of the female reproductive system. So the male reproductive system, the testes was located outside the body, but the entire female reproductive system is located inside the body in the abdomen. Only the vagina is the outer outlet of the female reproductive system. From this vagina the sperms enter and move up. They move upwards into the uterus. Over here, this fallopian tubes are the site for fertilization. The egg waits in the fallopian tube for fertilization. It waits for the sperm to get fertilized. Once it is not fertilized, it moves out of the body. So fallopian tubes or the oviducts are the site of fertilization. So let's just read it out. Fallopian tubes or oviducts are long tubes that carry the ovum from the ovary to the uterus. They are the site for fertilization. I have told you this. Then we have the uterus. It is a hollow pear shaped organ, and in the uterus only the baby grows for 9 months in this uterus, the uterus expands in size and the baby grows in this hollow cavity of uterus. The upper portion is broader while the lower portion is narrower, and the lower portion is called the cervix. Vagina is the muscular canal that goes from the uterus to outside of the body. It is the outer outlet of the female reproductive system. This vagina joins the cervical canal. Now this canal of this cervix, this canal along with this vaginal canal, both of these canals combine to form the birth canal. Birth canal is the canal from which the baby is delivered. So the baby grows inside this uterus for 9 months. After growing completely, the baby is pushed out of the uterus from the birth canal and out of the body. So this is all about female reproductive system. The diagram is also very important and all the parts are very important. All the functions of all the parts is very important. Moving ahead to fertilization. How does fertilization take place in human beings? We have seen that how does fertilization in plants take place? Let's see how does fertilization in humans take place. So let's see what happens in females and what happens in males. Let's start with the males. So in males, the sperm production starts after puberty in the testes, we have seen. Then through the penis, the sperms are deposited in the vagina. Now the mature sperms are deposited in the vagina. On the other hand, what is happening in the female? At birth, the female has various immature eggs. So various immature eggs are already present at birth, and these eggs slowly mature after puberty. After puberty, these eggs mature one by one. Every month one egg matures and is released into the fallopian tubes. Then the egg waits in the fallopian tube. So now the egg is waiting in the fallopian tube and the sperm has entered through the vagina. The sperm will travel all its way and it will come to the egg which is waiting in the fallopian tube. Now both the egg and sperm will combine to form a zygote, which will form the new individual and which will carry the generation forward. So fertilization occurs in the fallopian tube or the oviduct. In the fallopian tube, only one sperm fertilizes with the ovum to form a zygote. So the ovum ensures that only one sperm fertilizes with it, and this fusion of both the gametes is called fertilization. Then the embryo, now the embryo is in the fallopian tube. From the fallopian tube, the zygote moves towards the uterus and it undergoes some divisions to form the embryo. The zygote moves towards the uterus. Now the zygote moves inside the walls of the uterus and it gets embedded there, and this process is called implantation. So the embryo gets embedded in the thick inner lining of the uterus. So every month when the egg is matured, the uterus thickens its lining. This thickened lining has a lot of blood vessels which can supply nutrients to the zygote, to the embryo, for the development of the embryo in the uterus. So every month the lining of the uterus thickens. Now in this thickened lining, the embryo gets into that and gets embedded into that, and this process is called implantation. The embryo gets nutrition from the mother's blood with the help of a special tissue which is called placenta. Now placenta acts as a connecting link between the mother and the baby. Although the baby is already inside the uterus, but to get nutrients it has to be connected in some way to the mother. So the mother is responsible for all the exchange of gases, for feeding the child, and even for removing the waste material of the child. The mother and the placenta is responsible. The placenta is a special tissue which acts as a connecting link. At the mother side, the placenta has blood spaces, whereas at the side of the embryo, the placenta has various villi. These villi increases the surface area with the embryo. Now whatever the embryo is taking, all the nutrients, the glucose and everything is going from the mother to the embryo by the placenta. All the waste material of the embryo is coming from the embryo to the mother by placenta. All the gases are exchanged by the placenta. So placenta is very important and it is a very important connecting link between the mother and the embryo. Then the development of the child inside the mother's body takes place for 9 months. For 9 months, the child grows inside the mother's womb or the uterus, and the child is born after 9 months as a result of rhythmic contractions of the muscles of the uterus. The uterine muscles also contract, and by the birth canal the child is delivered and the child is born, and the child comes outside the body of the mother. This is how fertilization takes place, and this is how a baby is born by the birth canal. So I hope this is clear to you. Now let's move ahead to what will happen if there is no fertilization. Now eggs are released every month. Every month eggs are released by the female body. Immature eggs mature and they are released by the ovary into the fallopian tube. Now what will happen if there is no fertilization? Every month there cannot be fertilization. So in case of no fertilization, all the uterine thickening, so the uterus thickens its lining every month, as I told you earlier. This thickened lining of uterus along with the egg moves out of the body. So you can see this is the uterine lining. So this uterine lining dissociates and moves out of the body along with the egg. So when the egg is not fertilized, this lining is not required, and the lining slowly breaks down and comes out through the vagina as blood and mucus. This is called menstruation, and this cycle continues in the female from when the female attains puberty, when it is sexually mature. From that age to the age of 45 years, this cycle continues. There is continuous production of eggs, release of eggs. In absence of fertilization, eggs move out of the body and menstruation is there. This happens every month. So the release of blood and mucus from the vagina occurs, and this menstruation lasts for about 2 to 8 days. The first menstruation, which occurs at puberty at 11 to 12 years of age, is called monarch, and the last menstrual flow is called menopause. After menopause, the female is not sexually active now. The female is not able to reproduce now because there are no more eggs which are mature and which can be fertilized by the female. So this is what happens in case of absence of fertilization. All the blood along with the lining, along with the ovum, is secreted out or released out by the female body, and now new immature ova matures and new lining is formed every month. So now coming to the last topic of this chapter, which is reproductive health. We have understood what is reproduction. We have understood the different reproductive systems, the male and the female reproductive system, and how does fertilization occur. Now we have seen that this sexual intercourse, this fertilization, all this is a very intimate act, and there is a high chance and a high risk of transmission of various diseases which can be spread by bacterial and viral infections. So to protect these and to ensure that these diseases do not occur, this is what we study in reproductive health. So sexually transmitted diseases or STDs are the diseases which spread by this type of sexual contact from an infected person to a healthy person. These diseases can spread. Now sexually transmitted diseases can have bacterial origin as well, and they can be viral in nature as well. So some bacterial STDs include gonorrhea and syphilis. So you should know these examples. Gonorrhea and syphilis are examples of bacterial diseases. They are caused by some bacteria and they spread from sexual contact. Viral STDs include HIV AIDS, which is human. For the viral STDs, we have HIV AIDS, which is a very fatal and deadly viral disease, which is human immunodeficiency virus, and it causes AIDS. We also have a viral disease which is called as genital warts. So this is also spread by sexual contact. All these are examples of various STDs which can be caused by bacteria and as well as by different viruses. Now to protect these diseases and to prevent unwanted pregnancy, we have some contraceptive methods. So these contraceptive methods are available to avoid pregnancy by creating some barriers. So now we know that for pregnancy to occur, we need the fusion of the male and female gamete. But if there is some barrier between the male and female gamete, then this fertilization is not possible and pregnancy can be prevented. So we have 4 different types of contraceptive methods, starting with the mechanical barriers. So we have different physical devices like condoms, diaphragms and cervical caps, which are used by humans, which are self-insertable. So they can be inserted by ourselves as well, and they act as a mechanical or a physical barrier between both the germ cells. So they prevent the contact of sperm with the egg cells. So these devices prevent the entry of the sperm in the female genital tract. All these are made up of different types of materials which are friendly for the human skin as well, and they do not cause any infections as well. Condoms and these mechanical barriers are the only contraceptive methods which can protect us against sexually transmitted diseases as well. So to prevent STDs, we should use condoms, diaphragms and these cervical caps. The next type of contraceptive method which we have is the chemical method. In this method, the female takes some pills which are called the oral pills. These oral pills disturb the hormonal balance of the female body. Due to this hormonal imbalance, the egg is not only released. So if the egg is not released, there is no fusion between the egg and sperm. So fertilization is not possible. This is the chemical method of contraception, which is taken generally by the females, and oral pills are consumed for hormonal imbalance in the body. Then we have the surgical methods. These methods are permanent methods. In these methods, we cut a small piece of the vas deferens and of the fallopian tubes, and we tie them together so that there is no transport of sperm to the urethra, and the oviduct cannot transport the egg from the ovaries to the uterus. So both the tubes are surgically cut and tied so that no transport of the germ cell is possible. When the vas deferens is cut and tied, that procedure is called vasectomy. You can remember it by the name. Vasectomy is when the vas deferens is cut and tied in males, and tubectomy is when the fallopian tube or the oviduct is cut and tied in females so that the ovum cannot transport from the ovary to the uterus. So this is the surgical method. This is a permanent method and it cannot be reversed. Then we have the last method, which is the IUCD, which is intrauterine contraceptive devices. So these are certain devices which are inserted inside the uterus to prevent the contact of sperm and egg. You can see here we have a copper T. This is a T-shaped structure which is inserted inside the uterus. It is made up of copper. It often releases some hormones as well, which disturbs the balance of the female reproductive system, and hence pregnancy can be avoided. Copper T, and then we have various loops also, which are examples of IUCD, and these contraceptive devices can be used for preventing pregnancy. So we have these 4 different types of contraceptive devices, and we should encourage the use of these contraceptive devices to avoid unwanted pregnancy and pregnancy at young ages as well. Also, to prevent various STDs, these contraceptives are really effective. So this brings us to the end of this chapter. I hope you have understood everything about the chapter. If you have any doubts in any of the systems, in any of the fertilization, you can always ask us in the doubt section, in the comment section. All the notes are available in the description section of this video. Thank you so much for being with me till the very end of this video. If you need any other study material, you can visit our website STUDIFYSUCCESS.com, and thank you so much for being with me. Thank you.